Daniel stood inside the busy airport terminal wearing plain clothes that blended with the crowd. He carried a small bag and held a printed ticket like any other traveler. No one around him knew he was the leader of Skyways Airlines. His face showed calm, but his mind carried many questions. For months he had heard quiet complaints about his airline. Reports said service was slipping and respect was fading. Managers told him it was stress and nothing serious. Daniel chose not to argue and instead chose to see. Today he was not a boss but a passenger. Today he wanted the truth. The check-in area was loud and full of tired faces. People waited in long lines that moved very slowly. A mother tried to calm her child while standing on one foot. An old man leaned heavily on his suitcase for balance. Daniel watched the counter staff work without lifting their eyes. Voices sounded sharp and tired instead of kind. A man politely asked about his seat and was brushed away. Embarrassment crossed the man's face as others stared. Daniel felt something heavy settle in his chest. This was not how he imagined Skyways. When it was his turn, Daniel stepped forward quietly. He smiled and greeted the staff member with respect. She barely looked at him while tapping on her screen. He asked gently if a window seat was possible. Her answer came quick and cold with no care. She pushed the ticket back as if ending the talk. Daniel thanked her anyway and stepped aside. He reminded himself to stay silent and observe. Power meant nothing in this moment. Only honesty mattered now. Security was no better and maybe even worse. Guards shouted orders instead of guiding people. A traveler asked about a rule and was mocked loudly. Fear replaced confusion on the traveler's face. Daniel watched respect disappear with every raised voice. People followed rules but lost their dignity. The line moved forward with tension and silence. No one smiled and no one felt safe. Daniel clenched his hands without anyone noticing. Each step forward felt heavier than the last. At the gate, passengers waited with tired eyes. An announcement came late and without explanation. A delay was shared like bad news without apology. A young woman walked to the desk holding her phone. She spoke softly about a connection she might miss. The agent did not even look up while replying. The answer was short and uncaring and final. The woman walked away fighting tears. Daniel turned his head and breathed slowly. Something was deeply broken here. Boarding began with shouting and rushing. Passengers were treated like obstacles, not guests. Bags were criticized and voices were raised. A man stepped slightly out of line and was scolded. Laughter came from the desk, but not with passengers. Daniel boarded near the end without speaking. Inside the plane, the air felt tense and tired. A flight attendant waved people forward without eye contact. Daniel moved quickly to avoid trouble. Seat 24 was waiting. The cabin felt smaller than he remembered. A child kicked a seat while a man sighed loudly. An older woman struggled with a heavy bag. The attendant walked past without stopping. Daniel stood and helped the woman himself. Her quiet thank you carried more emotion than words. Announcements played with no warmth or care. Safety instructions felt like an annoyance to the crew. Daniel looked around at the silent faces. Trust was missing from this place. Then a moment came that changed everything. A man stood up slowly, looking confused and unsure. He spoke calmly about his seat number. The response from the crew was sharp and loud. The man froze as eyes turned toward him. His apology sounded small and broken. Silence filled the cabin like a heavy cloud. Daniel felt anger rise but kept his face still. This was his airline and his responsibility. And this was only the beginning. The plane began to move slowly away from the gate. Daniel felt the vibration under his feet and the tension in the air. Passengers sat quietly holding phones or staring ahead. No one spoke with excitement or comfort. This flight felt like a burden instead of a journey. Daniel watched faces filled with worry and silence. He remembered meetings where leaders spoke of pride. Those words felt empty inside this cabin. Reality was louder than any promise. And reality was sitting right here. As the plane climbed higher, the crew moved through the aisle. Their steps were fast, but their faces showed no care. A man pressed the call button to ask for water. Minutes passed and no one came. He pressed it again and looked around nervously. An attendant finally stopped with clear annoyance. She handed him a cup without a word. The man whispered thanks that went unheard. Daniel felt his jaw tighten slowly. Kindness had vanished from simple moments. The seatbelt sign stayed on longer than usual. A woman raised her hand, trying to ask something. The crew walked past her as if she was invisible. Her hand slowly dropped back to her lap. She looked down, feeling small and ignored. Daniel shifted in his seat, feeling helpless. He wanted to speak but held himself back. This test was painful but necessary. Every ignored passenger added weight to his heart. Every moment cut deeper than expected. Food service began with loud carts and sharp words. A passenger asked about a different meal option. The answer came fast and rude with no explanation. Trays were placed down without care. A drink spilled on a man's shirt nearby. He looked shocked and tried to speak. The attendant rolled her eyes and walked away. Another passenger helped him clean quietly. Daniel watched strangers support each other, while the crew turned their backs. The man beside Daniel leaned closer and whispered. He said skyways used to feel different before. He remembered smiles and calm voices. Now he avoided flying whenever he could. Daniel listened carefully without replying. Truth was being spoken without knowing who he was. This was not anger from one bad day. This was disappointment built over time. Daniel felt a deep sense of regret. He had been too far from the ground. Turbulence shook the cabin without warning. Fear spread quickly among the passengers. A child began to cry, holding onto the armrest. The mother looked around, asking for help. No calming words came from the crew. No announcement explained what was happening. Daniel spoke softly to the mother nearby. He told her the shaking would pass. His calm voice eased the child slightly. Passengers trusted strangers more than staff. When the shaking stopped, silence returned. People exhaled together like one tired body. Still no reassurance came from the front. Daniel stared at the ceiling lights, thinking deeply. Training manuals spoke of care and leadership. But those pages meant nothing without action. Somewhere between growth and profit, human connection had been forgotten. He wondered how long this had gone on, and how many voices were ignored. As the flight continued, more small moments added up. Requests were met with sighs and sharp looks. Questions were treated like problems. Passengers stopped asking for anything at all. They chose discomfort over humiliation. Daniel recognized fear in their quiet choices. This was damage that numbers could not show. This was trust breaking slowly and silently. He felt responsible for every second of it. And the weight was becoming unbearable. Near the end of the flight, an older man stood carefully. He needed help reaching the overhead compartment. His hands shook as he stretched upward. An attendant watched but did not move. Daniel stood and helped him without hesitation. The man smiled with relief and gratitude. Other passengers noticed and nodded softly. A small moment of humanity filled the aisle. Daniel felt eyes on him with quiet respect. The crew looked away, pretending not to see. As the plane prepared to land, tension returned. Announcements were rushed and unclear. Passengers gathered their things nervously. No one thanked them for flying. No warmth marked the end of the journey. When the wheels touched the ground, relief spread. People clapped quietly out of habit, not joy. Daniel remained seated, letting others pass. His mind was racing with hard decisions. This flight had changed everything. While walking through the aisle, Daniel felt different. He was no longer observing but preparing. This was no longer a secret visit. It was a mirror showing painful truth. He had seen enough to understand the depth. What hurt most was knowing it could be fixed, but only if courage replaced comfort. As he stepped off the plane quietly, a promise formed deep inside him. Skyways would not remain like this. Daniel walked through the terminal after landing with slow, steady steps. The noise around him felt distant and muted. People rushed past him chasing connections and exits. He stood near a large window watching planes move. His reflection stared back looking heavier than before. This trip had removed every excuse he once held. He no longer wondered if reports were true. He now wondered how long this pain had lasted. Every ignored face stayed in his memory. He knew silence would make him part of the problem. Instead of leaving the airport, Daniel sat near a quiet corner. He opened his phone and reviewed past messages. Complaints once labeled small now felt loud. Words like rude, cold, ignored, and ashamed stood out. He remembered brushing them aside with logic. Growth numbers had blinded him to human signals. Success had created distance between leaders and reality. Daniel closed his eyes and took a long breath. This was not about anger but responsibility. And responsibility required action, not comfort. He decided to stay inside the airport longer. Not as a passenger this time but as an observer. He watched another Skyways crew arrive for boarding. Their body language showed stress before work even began. No smiles, no greetings, no shared purpose. They spoke among themselves with tired expressions. Daniel realized pressure rolled downhill without control. Managers pushed targets without care. Supervisors passed stress onto crew. And passengers paid the price. Daniel followed the group from a distance. He listened without being noticed. A crew member complained about schedules. Another spoke about punishment for small mistakes. Someone mentioned being afraid to slow down. Kindness was seen as weakness under pressure. Daniel felt a sharp sting of regret. Culture had shifted without him seeing it. Fear had replaced pride quietly. And leadership had failed to protect its people. Later he sat near a cafe watching interactions. A staff member dropped a cup and froze in fear. A supervisor scolded them loudly in public. Passengers stared feeling awkward and uneasy. The staff member nodded silently with lowered eyes. Daniel felt anger but also sadness. This behavior shaped everything downstream. Hurt workers created hurt passengers. The cycle fed itself every day. And no one had broken it. Daniel realized something painful and important. His crew was not the enemy. They were exhausted, unheard, and scared. Training focused on rules, not care. Rewards praised speed, not humanity. Mistakes were punished, not corrected. This system had been built slowly. And he had approved it without knowing. Leadership had spoken numbers louder than values. Now the damage was visible everywhere. He returned to the restroom and looked in the mirror. The face looking back carried guilt and clarity. This was no longer about exposure or testing. This was about repair and trust. He knew change would bring resistance. Some leaders would deny the truth. Others would fear losing control. But avoiding discomfort had caused this mess. Daniel straightened his shoulders quietly. The next step would be difficult but necessary. He sent a short message to his assistant. It asked for an emergency meeting that evening. No reasons given, no delays allowed. He asked for record schedules and feedback reports. He requested unedited passenger messages. He asked for staff surveys without filters. This was not a performance meeting. This was a listening meeting. Truth would no longer be softened. Every voice would finally matter. As evening approached, Daniel left the airport. The sky outside was turning dark and calm. He walked alone without a car or escort. His thoughts moved faster than his steps. He replayed faces from the flight again. The confused man, the crying child, the tired woman. They deserved better than silence. Skyways had promised care, not control. That promise had been broken. And Daniel intended to face the cost. That night Daniel sat alone preparing his words. He did not write a speech. He wrote questions and left space for answers. He planned to speak less and listen more. Leadership had hidden behind distance for too long. Tomorrow comfort would be replaced by honesty. This undercover journey had ended. But a harder journey was about to begin. One that would test his courage deeply. And reshape everything Skyways stood for. The meeting room filled slowly as leaders took their seats. Faces showed surprise, confusion, and guarded confidence. No one expected Daniel to sit at the table alone. There were no screens, no slides, no prepared speech. Silence stretched as people waited for direction. Daniel looked around, taking in every expression. This room had once felt powerful and distant. Now it felt fragile and exposed. He let the quiet stay a little longer. Then he began to speak calmly. Daniel told them about the flight in simple words. He described the terminal, the gate, and the cabin. He spoke of tired faces and harsh voices. No names were used and no blame was placed. But the truth landed heavily in the room. Some leaders shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others crossed their arms in quiet defense. Daniel did not raise his voice. He spoke as someone carrying weight. And everyone could feel it. He asked them when kindness became optional. When fear replaced pride in daily work. When speed mattered more than people. No one answered at first. The questions hung in the air without demand. Daniel made it clear this was not punishment. It was an awakening that could no longer wait. He invited honesty even if it was painful. Slowly a manager spoke about pressure. Another admitted numbers ruled every decision. Stories began to surface from the room. Supervisors talked about impossible schedules. Team leaders spoke of warnings instead of guidance. Training heads admitted care was never measured. Rewards were tied to speed alone. Fear of mistakes shaped daily behavior. Daniel listened without interrupting. He took notes but did not react. This was the first time truth flowed freely. And it was heavier than expected. Then Daniel made a decision clear to everyone. Change would not be small or slow. Metrics would be rewritten from the ground up. Care, respect, and calm would be measured. Leadership behavior would be reviewed openly. Supervisors would be trained to support, not threaten. Crew voices would be protected and heard. Passengers would be treated as guests again. This was not a suggestion or test. It was a new direction starting now. Some leaders showed concern about cost and time. Daniel acknowledged those fears without anger. He reminded them of the cost already paid. Lost trust, broken pride, and public damage. Numbers meant nothing without human respect. He said growth without care was failure. Silence returned, but this time it felt different. It was thoughtful, not defensive. Change was uncomfortable but necessary. And everyone knew it. After the meeting, Daniel walked through offices. He spoke directly with small teams. He asked simple questions and listened closely. Many were shocked by his presence. Some were nervous and careful at first. Then honesty began to surface quietly. Workers spoke of exhaustion and fear. They spoke of wanting to do better. Daniel thanked them without promises. But his presence alone changed the room. Training programs were paused and rewritten. Rules were reviewed with human focus. Support lines were opened without punishment. Supervisors were coached in calm leadership. Crew schedules were adjusted to reduce strain. Recognition programs shifted toward care moments. Small changes began to ripple outward. Not loudly and not for attention, but with purpose and consistency. Trust started its slow return. On the next Skyways flight something felt different. Crew members greeted passengers with eye contact. Voices were calmer and movements more patient. Mistakes were handled quietly with support. Passengers noticed and responded in kind. Smiles returned to small moments. The cabin felt lighter than before. No announcements promised perfection. Only effort and respect. And that was enough to begin. Daniel sat in his office watching feedback arrive. Messages spoke of improvement and relief. Not perfection but progress. He knew change would take time. Some habits would resist and test patience. But leadership had reconnected with reality. This journey had not been easy. Going undercover had exposed painful truth. But it also reopened a broken path toward dignity, trust, and care. As night fell, Daniel looked out over the city. Lights stretched far beyond his view. Each one represented a person served by skyways. He understood now what leadership truly meant. Not distance but presence. Not power but responsibility. This story was not about regret alone. It was about choosing to act when truth appears. And Skyways was finally learning again how to treat people like people. Weeks passed and the change at Skyways became visible. Not as a loud campaign but as steady daily behavior. Daniel kept visiting airports without announcements. Sometimes he wore a suit and sometimes plain clothes. He spoke with cleaners, gate staff, cabin crew, and travelers. He listened more than he talked every time. People began to trust that he meant what he said. The fear in the workplace started to loosen. Respect became a habit again, not a rule. And small kindness returned like morning light. One morning Daniel walked into the main training center. New hires sat in rows holding notebooks and hope. Old crew members were there too for refresh sessions. Daniel did not stand above them on a stage. He sat among them like a normal learner. He shared one lesson from his undercover flight. He spoke about the power of simple care. A calm tone, a clear answer, a helpful hand. He said these things build trust faster than any ad. The room stayed quiet because everyone understood. Soon a new practice spread through the company. Each week teams shared one moment of care. A crew member calming a scared child during turbulence. A gate agent helping an older traveler find a seat. A supervisor praising effort instead of attacking mistakes. These moments were recorded and celebrated. Not for fame but for culture. People began to compete in a better way. Not for speed alone but for human respect. The best stories were not perfect work. They were real moments where someone felt seen. Passenger feedback slowly changed in tone. Angry messages became fewer and less intense. Neutral messages turned into grateful ones. Some wrote about feeling safe and respected again. Others said they noticed smiles return. Even delays felt easier when explained with care. Daniel knew problems would still happen in travel. Weather, plane schedules, and busy days could not be controlled. But behavior could be controlled every time. That was the difference Skyways had finally accepted. One afternoon Daniel returned to the same airport route. He booked another economy seat quietly. Not to test people like traps, but to feel the atmosphere honestly. At check-in a line formed as usual. A new staff member greeted each person with a warm voice. When a traveler looked confused she explained gently. No mocking, no rushing, no cold words. Daniel felt a strange tightness in his throat. This simple moment proved change was real. At the gate a delay happened again like before. But the announcement sounded different this time. The agent explained the reason clearly and apologized. She offered options and helped those with tight connections. A young man looked stressed and the agent spoke calmly. She printed a new plan and told him what to do. The young man smiled with relief and thanked her. Daniel watched quietly, feeling both proud and humbled. The same situation now had a different outcome. Because people were treated with dignity. On the plane, a flight attendant greeted Daniel kindly. She looked him in the eyes and smiled. She welcomed him and offered help with his bag. During the flight, she moved with calm confidence. When someone asked a question, she answered with patience. When a drink spilled, she returned with napkins and care. When turbulence shook the cabin, she made a steady announcement. Children relaxed and adults breathed easier. Daniel sat back and listened to the cabin sounds. The tension that once lived here was gone. Near the end of the flight, something unexpected happened. An older woman in the aisle looked at Daniel closely. She hesitated, then spoke softly. She said she remembered him from the airport weeks ago. She remembered him helping with a heavy bag. She said she had wondered why a stranger cared so much. Daniel smiled politely and thanked her. Before she walked away, she added one more thing. She said Skyways felt different now, and she hoped it stayed that way. After landing, Daniel waited until most passengers left. He remained seated watching the crew reset the cabin. He noticed small things he had never valued enough before. A quiet thank you between co-workers. A gentle reminder instead of a sharp command. A shared smile after a long day. These were the real signs of health. Not just on time charts or profit reports. Daniel stood slowly and walked toward the exit. He felt lighter because the airline felt human again. Back at headquarters, Daniel held a final review meeting. Leaders presented new numbers and improved feedback. But Daniel focused on something else. He asked them to describe the hardest lessons learned. One leader said fear breaks service from the inside. Another said respect must be taught and protected daily. A supervisor admitted they once chased speed at any cost. Now they chased calm and clarity with pride. Daniel nodded and reminded them this was not finished. Culture could slip back if watched only on paper. Presence and listening had to stay constant. That evening, Daniel returned home quietly. He sat by the window with a simple cup of tea. He thought about the first flight and the silence in that cabin. He thought about how fast trust can break, and how slowly it returns with effort. He did not feel like a hero. He felt like a leader who finally woke up. Sometimes regret is not the end of a story. Sometimes it is the moment a better story begins.